Welcome back to the Company Show. We tell it is, we don't care how you feel, and we have another 2026 schedule preview and prediction to get to today. I've already done a handful of other SEC schools, so if you're interested in those, go to my channel. They'll be there. But up today, we've got Ole Miss on deck. Let's talk about their season last year. What a phenomenal season. One of their better seasons in their school history. They went 13-2 overall, 7-1 in the SEC. They beat LSU, Oklahoma. They unfortunately got revenge on my dogs in the playoff. Georgia did win the first contest in the regular season in Athens. They met in the Sugar Bowl in the playoff where Ole Miss did get their revenge. They would go on to play Miami in the Fiesta Bowl in the semifinal for the college football playoff where they did lose to Miami, bringing an end to a phenomenal season, a phenomenal run. They had a good season. But it can't help but to feel overshadowed by the drama that is Lane Kiffin. We all know Lane Kiffin left Ole Miss to go to LSU in the middle of a college football playoff run. I'll be honest, I thought it was kind of crappy of Lane Kiffin to do that. I understood the move. I do think that LSU head coaching job is a better job than the Ole Miss one. Cry about it if you want Ole Miss. That's how I feel. But I do feel like it was pretty shitty of what Lane Kiffin did to leave in the middle. Kind of crappy. Obviously, you had Pete Golding step in as the head coach. He was the defensive coordinator at the time. He stepped in to fill the role of the head coaching shoes, and he did a great job. I really thought that they were going to kind of take a step back. When they played Georgia, I thought they were going to come out hot in their first playoff game, which they did. Now, I know who they played wasn't the greatest competition, but they let everyone know they're legit. And I thought coming into that Georgia game in the Sugar Bowl that they weren't going to be as prepared. And that I was still very unsure about Pete Golding. They proved me wrong. They came out and it seemed like they played with more energy, more passion, more determination to win. And they beat the dogs. They beat my dogs, and they had a hell of a game. So all the credit to Pete Golding. He stepped into a pretty shitty situation, and he exceeded my expectations. So he does return as the head coach. You also got John Baker as the offensive coordinator and Brian Brown as the defensive coordinator. So those are your returning coaching staff. Their spring game, they didn't have another spring game. They had what's called a Meet the Rebels Day, the same way they did last year. Last year, they gave some excuse for injuries. I think this is stupid. I can't stand that this is a trend going around college football, that these schools are getting away from spring game. I hate it. I absolutely hate it. I'm 30 years old. I have been watching college football since I was in diapers, since I can remember. There's never been a time that I don't remember not watching college football. And I love the spring games. I know they're not always on TV, but I'm now a father. I'm 30 years old, I have a son, have a wife, have a family. The spring game is one of the few times a year that you can bring your family to campus, to the stadium, and enjoy a game-like atmosphere without breaking the bank. I like the idea that they had Meet the Rebels Day. I do think that's a very good idea for the fans. It still gets fan engagement. I'm sure they charge for it. And I'm sure fans absolutely love meeting the players. And I wish more schools did that. I like that idea of Meet the Team Day. But we can't get away from the spring games. We have lost so much tradition in the sport of college football. It is an ever-changing sport. You go back 5 years ago, it looks completely different now than what it did 5 years ago. So I hate that more schools are going away from the spring game, but it is what it is. I can't control it. I just absolutely hate it. So not really a lot to pull from their spring camp besides what the articles you wrote. But if you are an Ole Miss fan, one thing that you do know is that you got Trinidad Chambliss coming back as the starting quarterback. He returns as your quarterback. He had a phenomenal year last year. The kid was a stud. He lit up my dogs. He lit up our secondary. So he's coming back, 6-year senior this year to lead the team. 22 touchdowns last year, 3 interceptions. The fact that this man went all year long into the playoff with only 3 interceptions is really good. I mean, he's protecting the ball. had 527 rushing yards with 8 touchdowns on the ground. So those are good numbers, not the best, but very solid numbers. Obviously, and also on top of that, you got a lot of returners coming into this season. Ole Miss did finish number 2 in the transfer portal with 29 total additions, but that is a lot. But you're returning key starters. You're returning very good starters at key positions. Your running back, you bring Kewan Lacey back. I think he's really good. I think he's going to get drafted first round this year. Perkins, linebacker. Hell of a linebacker. Echols at defensive tackle. You got Kite at defensive back and Deuce Alexander as wide receiver. Very important roles. You're returning very solid players. So that's what that to me is more important than having a lot of returners, is that you have very good returners at very key positions. So really good returners, really good transfer portal. This Ole Miss team is looking to be very, very dangerous this season. What are my questions for this Ole Miss team going into 2026? Well, to start off with, is Pete Golding legit? I know he had a great end to the season when he stepped into the role as head coach. Everything that he had to kind of push away, all the drama that surrounded Lane Kiffin, he kind of had to push that out. And I do believe he exceeded my expectations for stepping into that role. He did a great job. Is he legit long-term? Is he legit with long-term with a full season to prepare and then going into future seasons? Only time will tell. That is a big question to me. Is Pete Golding actually legit? Second question, can they continue the success, this Ole Miss team? Can they continue and build off the success that they had last year going into this year? How will they respond given a full offseason of everything that happened? How will they respond? Got to be honest, Ole Miss is not a traditional powerhouse. They're not winning national championships every 5 years, hell, even 10 years. I don't know how many, they're not winning conference championships all the time. So how can they continue to build off the success that they had last year and even the past few years and continue that forward? And my third and final, and what I think to be one of the biggest questions, is what kind of year, what kind of season is Trinidad Chambliss going to have? Is he going to have a Heisman contending season, or is he going to take a step back? I think that is very important to determine where this Ole Miss team goes. If we're expecting SEC championship contenders, college football playoff contenders, and potentially win the college football national championship, Trinidad Chambliss has got to have a Heisman contending season. Those are my 3 questions. Is Pete Golding legit? Can they build off the success from last year? And what kind of season is Trinidad Chambliss going to have? So that's a little bit about last season. That's a little bit about my questions going into this season. Let's jump to their schedule, break it down. What I'm going to do is run through the schedule, give the opponents and their dates, and then we'll talk about it after. So they get things kicked off on a Sunday, September 6th. Against Louisville. This is the first weekend of college football. So typically on the first weekend, we have games on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. This happens to be a Sunday game for Ole Miss. They do play Louisville. It is a neutral site game there in Tennessee. They play, I think it's, Tennessee where the Titans play. Neutral site that Sunday on the 6th. Then after that, they are back home against a nobody, a cupcake, name your score type of game. Charlotte, they do have a short week that week because they play Sunday and have to return immediately, but they play Charlotte. So it is what it is. After Charlotte, they do stay home. But boy, is this a big game. Probably the most anticipated game on Ole Miss's schedule. One of the most anticipated games that I'm looking forward to as a Dogs fan. September 19th, at home for Ole Miss, they play LSU. It's going to be a primetime game. It's going to be a night game. It's going to be the game of the week there in week 3. Boy, oh boy, whew, I'm excited for this. September 19th, at home, Ole Miss, LSU, huge game. Then after that, they go on the road, their first true road game. Obviously, they had that neutral site game against Louisville, but this is their first true road game. September 26th, they take on the Florida Gators. Then after that, they do have a bye there on October 3rd, coming out, which I do think is a weird spot for a bye week. You play 4 games, 5 games, and then, 4 games, and then you have a bye. Weird, but whatever. Coming out of the bye, October 10th, you are on the road to take on Vandy. Then you're back home on October 17th to take on Mizzou. And then you go on the road on October 24th to take on Texas. Another very big game. That's going to be a very anticipated game. Could well be the game of the week. Really looking forward to that one. That's going to be a hard atmosphere, crazy atmosphere. So October 24th on the road at Texas. After the Texas game, you do come home for 2 weeks back in a row. You play October 31st, Halloween, Auburn. And then first weekend in November, November 7th, you take on my Dogs. Can we get our get back? I'm excited for that game. After the Georgia game, you go back on the road November 14th to take on Oklahoma. Very tough stretch of games right there. After the Oklahoma game, you are back home on November 21st to play Wofford. Very weird spot here. I do know that a lot of SEC schools have these 2 games a year where they're basically cupcakes. From everyone that I've done, they usually get them out of the way in the beginning. This is the first time that I've seen one of these crappy November slate games, but it is what it is. And then to round things out, November 27th, the last regular season game of the year, you take on Mississippi State, your in-state rival. That is a home game for you. So that is the schedule that I just ran through. What are my takeaways from the schedule? First takeaway, I've already kind of hinted at it, is their first SEC game of the year. LSU. At home. It's going to be a night game. Kickoff is probably going to be 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock. This is going to be a must-see, must-watch game. If you got plans, tell them to fuck off. You can't make it. Lane Kiffin left Ole Miss to go to LSU. Ole Miss now gets Lane Kiffin and the Tigers at home. I cannot wait for this game. This is going to be a tone setter for both teams, for LSU and for Ole Miss. Regardless how it goes, this game is going to define the rest of the season for both of these teams. And I cannot stress it enough how important this is for Ole Miss and how excited I am. Like, I'm literally getting chills just thinking about it. Great game. So that's my first takeaway. First SEC game is against LSU and their former head coach, Lane Kiffin, who dumped them and left them. So going to be some bit bitterness there. Cannot wait to see. Second one is, it's a weird bye week with a very tough second half of the schedule. You play 4 teams: Louisville, Charlotte, LSU, and Florida. Then you have a bye week. Kind of weird there, because then coming out of your bye week, you play Vandy. I get a lot of these teams don't get to really control where their bye week falls. So I just think that that's very strange placement for a bye week. But coming out of that bye week, it gets very difficult. Look, LSU game is going to be tough. On the road at Florida is going to be tough. I think that on the road at Florida is going to be a sneaky game. I really do. So coming out of their bye week, it gets really tough. These are the teams that they have to play in a row. Four games in a row. On the road at Texas. Texas is going to be one of the best SEC teams. One of the best SEC teams. One of the best teams in college football. You got to go on the road to play them. Then you come back home to play Auburn. Look, I get Auburn's not going to be a powerhouse. I don't expect them to go 10-2 or anything like that. I believe they'll probably be closer to 6-6. But the point being is that they're going to be a tough team. And then immediately after Auburn, you got to take Georgia, which is probably going to be one of the best teams in the SEC, one of the top 5, top 10 teams in the league. And then after that, you got to go on the road to take on Oklahoma. That is a brutal stretch of games right there. So weirdly placed bye week and very tough second half of the season. And I also believe that this year is harder than last year. Looking at Ole Miss's schedule last year, I didn't think it was all that tough. That's not really their fault. You can only play the teams that are on your schedule. Regardless of how good or bad the teams are that you play, doesn't really determine how good or bad you are. But I do think that this season is a lot more difficult than last season. They basically trade out Kentucky, Arkansas, and South Carolina for Vandy, Auburn, and Texas. If it was up to me and I had the choice of playing Vandy, Auburn, or Texas, or Kentucky, Arkansas, and South Carolina, I would much rather play Kentucky, Arkansas, and South Carolina any day of the week, any year, because I think that's 3 guaranteed wins. So that's the schedule. That's my takeaways from the schedule. What's the 4 for this Ole Miss team? I think the 4 is 7-5. I think, and I know that's pretty low, and if you're an Ole Miss fan, you're watching like 7-5, get real. Look, things could go bad real quick. We don't know how Pete Golding is going to respond from last year, how this team is going to respond, and how well Pete Golding is going to be able to do with a full offseason. We haven't seen it yet. So I think if everything goes wrong, the wheels fall off the bus, the engine is on fire, you're waving the white flag, I think the worst that this team can possibly do is 7-5. I do not think they go anywhere near that. Kind of. What's the ceiling? I think an 11-1. I think the ceiling for this team is too talented. They've got so much on the roster. They're that good that I think they go 11-1. I do not think any SEC team goes undefeated in the regular season. I don't think any team really goes undefeated. So ceiling 11-1. What's my prediction? I'm stuck on 9-3 and 10-2. When I first wrote down my notes, I went 9-3. Then I kind of went over and I'm like, I think they'll go 10-2. And then now I'm kind of back on 9-3. I'm between 9-3 and 10-2. If I had to lean one direction, and I always do, I make a final pick in these videos, I'm going 9-3. That is my prediction. I think they take 2 road L's. I think they lose on the road at Texas. I think Texas is going to be very, very good. And I think that they lose on the road in upset to Florida. I think it's a possibility that they lose to Oklahoma on the road. But something about that Florida game, it's before bye week. It's after LSU. After a huge emotional game, win or lose, it's a huge game. And then they got to go on the road to Florida, who has everything to prove under a new head coach. And I do think Florida pulls up an upset this year. I think they lose to Florida. So I think they take 2 road L's. I think one of those is Florida. I think they lose to Texas. I think they lose to Florida. I wouldn't be surprised if they beat Florida. I wouldn't be shocked. I kind of expect them to beat Florida. They should. And then I think they do take a loss at home, whether that be Georgia or LSU. I think they split those games 50-50. I wouldn't be surprised if they lost LSU and beat Georgia. I wouldn't be surprised if they beat LSU and lost or vice versa. So that's my prediction. 9-3 for the Ole Miss Rebs. Taking 2 road L's, 1 L at home. I do think they lose to my Dogs. Possible LSU, and I think they fall to Florida. I think that's a sneaky game. So if you're an Ole Miss fan, watch out for that game. But that is my take. That is my prediction for the 2026 Ole Miss schedule. Let me know down in the comments how wrong I am, if I don't know ball, or if you agree. Let me know if you agree. Other than that, over and out.